Welcome everybody to this webinar series from the University of Greenwich, a nudge and a push towards ethical sustainability in an era of invisible data harvesting. Thank you for joining us to attend tonight's webinar, to the attendees on Zoom and on our YouTube stream too. Tonight's webinar is called Gaming for Good, and it is looking at sustainable consumption and production in a data-driven world. My name is Ghislaine Boddington, and I'm a reader in digital immersion at the University of Greenwich and lead curator for this webinar series. This is a 4-talk series linked to DATUM R&D, an Innovate UK funded project involving University of Greenwich, ZUK and Body Data Space. This project is working in two particular projects inside it, sub-projects called DATUM Audio and DATUM A&R. We're not going to speak specifically on those tonight. We're going to talk to you about some of the concerns at the base of this project that we're looking at as a group. And these include sustainable consumption and ethical data use. I just want to tell you about the chat rooms and the question and answer rooms that are in front of you on Zoom. This is a webinar, so therefore we can't see you and we won't hear your voices, but we've been looking for ways to try and interact you. So the chat rooms, both in YouTube and in Zoom, will become documents attached to the recording to go on the University of Greenwich research website, the YouTube website, in a week or so. So we'd like you to add into the chat rooms as we're talking, and you will see we will upload there the bios of the people who are speaking as they come up. We will add links to various parts of the conversation, and you also are welcome to add there reports, articles, maybe links to your own work, anything relative to the topic and theme that we can also add to and will remain within this resource document that will be linked to University of Greenwich. This resource document can be used by lecturers, staff, students in Greenwich, of course, but also from people from worldwide, public and other universities worldwide. And it will be a document of today, of what's this discussion, this Gaming for Good discussion, and where it is at this particular point in time on May the 19th, 2021. So through weaving enterprise-linked events with expert speakers for public, staff and students, and with creating knowledge resources, here we are trying to create a really good knowledge exchange. And this is looking at a worldwide push. How can we all share together? How can we all move forward? Technology is a valuable tool towards the direction of ethical consumption and can enable social change. What we're not doing here is looking for the solutions. If anything, we're looking for the next questions we must all ask, the next things that we need to research, the next approaches we need to take. So we're looking to the future, and try yourselves also to join us in suggesting some options and outcomes that could occur, positives and negatives, of course. There is also a question and answers box in front of you on your Zoom, and there you will be able to put questions which the chair will return to after all the speakers have done their presentations and at the end of the chat, and he will bring those up into the speakers. There you can upvote other questions. So if you see something that you're feeling good about or about to put in, please upvote it. We are not going to attempt to answer all questions individually. We will cluster them to enable the panel to talk more and to hear their voices more. Thank you for joining us on this. We also have a tweet stream going, which is #nudgepush21. And so do join that either now during the webinar or afterwards, and help us to move this information further around the world. So now I would like to introduce the chair for tonight's session, for the Gaming for Good session as part of this Nudge and Push series, Dr. Jorge Lopez Ramos, who's Executive Director of ZU UK and Associate Professor in Contemporary Performance here at the University of Greenwich. George, great. I'm going to hand over to you to bring your speakers on, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing the session, and I'll join you at the end to do the final goodbyes and to point forward on what's happening next in the webinar series.
Thank you, Ghislaine. Hi, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me. And a huge thank you to the University of Greenwich team and partners behind the scenes making all of this work so smoothly. At such complex times, for most people, we don't want to take for granted your contribution in order to make this happen. And hi there. You signed up for this talk and you turned up. Here you are. And whether you connected with us today just to watch and listen to the debate, or whether you have already rolled up your sleeves and are ready to engage with the discussion via chat, a very warm welcome to you. I can assure you that you're welcome here, whether you're planning to fully participate or just to sit back and listen. We're delighted that so many of you have decided to join us. Throughout the talk, we'll be using the two key functions on Zoom, as mentioned earlier. The Q&A box, these are questions we'll deal with at the end of the session, and the chat function, which we'll use all the way through the talk. So please use them as much as you like. Remember though, to select panelists and attendees from the drop-down menu to make sure everyone sees your message. So today's talk will be led by and with designers and makers of what we might call serious games. We are in various ways, creators of participatory and interactive experiences. So the debate today is part of a series that examines topical issues for a range of sectors, including games and immersive, in terms of sustainable and ethical processes. The DATUM R&D project, of which this talk is part of, is investigating new technological and artistic models that could aid sustainable consumption, enable the protection of ethical use of personal data, and generate new ways of relating to other human beings, locally and globally. And as such, the series of panels has been activating this debate about the emerging sustainable options with an aim to find win-win solutions between all involved, the user and the creator. So today, this specific talk will be adding to this conversation by focusing on 4 guiding questions with our panelists and with you. Well, we'll now pass on these questions into the chat so you can follow with us. So even those of us who openly love games and gaming or see ourselves as playful tend to suffer from a hard-to-shake urge to dismiss those realms of experience and interaction as somehow frivolous, inessential, and tainted with a slight shame of childishness. The panelists today will talk about games as ways to hack and to repurpose our public spaces, our everyday rituals, and the ways in which we relate to others digitally and physically. So, what is a serious game? And how can the instruction and rule system of games be used as fields of experimentation for new ways of thinking about social structures? Now, some of you here might be well-versed in the games and serious game world, but for all of us, you might have come across such terms as serious games or games for change, games for impact, gamification, game-based learning. And whether these relate to video games or to physical digital games, we can probably agree that they're often based on an understanding of games for entertainment only, or for education or social good, and everything in between. So some definitions of game-based learning, for instance, might describe it as mainly for entertainment, but with some learning themes. And gamification, on the other end of the scale, is game mechanics used specifically for non-entertainment goals, while serious games would probably sit somewhere in the middle. The first recorded use of gamification is often attributed to the founding of the Boy Scout movement in 1908, due to its use of badges and recognition of achievements. So I wonder if we could see the beginning of organized religion as the first ever serious game. But let's not get sidetracked. In today's discussion, we're interested in looking at the purpose behind the design of the games for good, the choices designers make and why. At the beginning of the pandemic, ZUK co-authored the Post-Immersive Manifesto. This was meant as a reflective document from theatre and from game makers, but also was the beginning of a wider conversation with makers of immersive content. And at its core, the manifesto called designers to question their approach to design and its impacts it could have on player behavior. The manifesto highlighted 3 simple questions. Who is it by? Who is it with? Who is it for? So from whose perspective are we speaking today? Makers, players, and who are you? watching us, listening and participating? Why are you here today? Can I kindly ask you to jump into the chat and tell us? Please go ahead and tell us who you are via the chat function, which spheres of the world you mainly operate in. What do you do? They can be complementary, often contradictory, human life is. So please, as you engage in the chat, I'm also asking you and the speakers, I'll be asking of the speakers throughout the session to also acknowledge from what perspective they are talking from. And as you do that, and as I do that, I'll also tell you from what perspective I'm speaking from. So there was 20 years ago in Brazil, I completed an intensive course with Augusto Boal. And some of you might be familiar with the theater of the oppressed methodology. So before meeting Boal and understanding the forum theater methodology, I hadn't realized that extraordinary art and activism were not mutually exclusive, and that they could be such powerful allies for personal growth and social change. Until that moment, I had not really seen a place for someone like me in the world of proper art and proper academia. I also understood that games and theater were intrinsically connected. So I was born at the end of the Brazilian dictatorship. I was raised in Borel, one of the Rio de Janeiro's largest favelas, to a Polish and a Romanian immigrant family. My grandfather was a watchmaker, my grandmother a street fruit seller in Rio. My mother was the first in her family to get to university, and my late father dedicated his life to two passions, arts and politics. He was also one of the founders of Brazil's Workers' Party in the early 80s. So as a working class 18-year-old student in London with no network of family ties in the UK and very poor English, it took me a while to find a way into starting my own company. And whether, now I can look back from a position of speaking that language and being in the position of a university post, it's very clear that right at the beginning, it was very easy to be guided by what models we should follow. Often from the outside, you look at a model and you assume that's the only way to do it. And so you try to emulate it. I tried to learn the language properly. And it wasn't until much later I realized that it is our perspective as outsiders, as working class immigrants, that can offer true change and true alternatives to the status quo. So it is my experience as an outsider that informed why I make the work I do and who I make it for. And just to wrap up, for ZU specifically, ZU UK, and you hear more later from Persijaj Maravala, our artistic director, ZU's focus on DATUM has emerged out of two earlier projects in relation to social impact or gaming for good. They were DATUM, small data mining in 2016 and missing in 2017 and 19. They both looked at player behavior in shopping malls in relation to production cycles and supply chains. Both projects explored the player's engagement with data mining at an individual level in relation to game mechanics, audio-led narrative, and instruction-based performance. Now, as part of the DATUM R&D project, we have been working with researchers from the BHRE research group and Let's Lab, who you've heard from earlier in the earlier talk, to deepen the research into multiplayer relationships in public spaces and the potential for shifts of awareness and behavior when a public space is used as a site for a ghost hunt, where the horror stories come from the very much alive ghosts in the supply chains. So enough about me and my work. So who are our panelists today? Today, we will hear from and work together with Rilla Khaled, Director of Technoculture Arts and Games, Research Centre, Canada's most well-established game research lab, the co-founder and CEO of Grendel Games, Tim Lanning, and Persijaj Maravala, Artistic Director of ZU UK. We can definitely say that Rilla, Tim, and Persijaj are makers and designers of games that go way beyond entertainment and have a thing or two to say about serious games and player behavior. From artistic integrity to commercialism, our panelists speak from a wide range of contexts, including academia, commercial games, and the arts. I also invited Rilla, Tim, and Persijaj to provide us with some creative prompts throughout our talk today, and I'm glad to say they have generously accepted and will be providing us with some input throughout the talk, especially when we all us, chair, panelists, and you from home, create and co-author an online manifesto on serious games. But more on that later. For now, I'm absolutely delighted to introduce you to Rilla Khaled. So Rilla, would you mind turning your camera on? Thank you for joining us, and I'll hand over to you.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for inviting me to be here and to share some of my work with you. So I'm just going to get a screen share going. Okay. All right. So I was tasked with responding to this question. How can playful game-based uses of technology be used to draw awareness to the centrality and mistreatment of the human body within a data-driven world? So before I dive into answering, I want to give you a bit of context about who I am and what I do. So I'm a computer scientist who works with human-computer interaction, design, and playful media. And I've been working with serious and persuasive games and playful interaction for the last 15 years or so. In addressing this question, I want to share 3 research through design projects that propose partial answers. So the first project concerns the Imagining Indigenous Futures research project that I'm a co-investigator on. So one of the major activities of the project is a workshop series called Skins, which focuses on Indigenous futurism. So this is a term that was coined by my colleague, Jason Lewis. And essentially it concerns Indigenous folks taking their place in new media spaces, such as games and 3D worlds. So our workshops at their core are about empowering Indigenous youth with maker skills such that they can populate these spaces with self-determined, contemporary and future-oriented narratives. And part of our work has concerned breaking down assumptions around old media and new media, especially between folk games and digital games. Folk games frequently involve bodies and they're laden with cultural values. So the photo that you see is from a 2018 workshop we held in Hawaii. And in this session, we were uncovering game mechanics that are expressed in folk games. Now, while there's a ton of existing critique about the limited representations and AAA big budget games, I saw a comment come up in the chat about GTA, for instance. So I'm not going to get into the critique. Our focus in this project is about transposing and translating Indigenous game mechanics and narratives into game worlds. So this is a tricky balance because our workshop participants generally have a particular vision of digital game in their heads, which draws on mainstream offerings. But at the same time, they're also committed to making those games look, sound, and feel more like themselves. And our approach to help make this happen has been to feature multiple mini games within a larger game world frame, where each game takes on a specifically culturally playful transposition. So what you're seeing now is a thoroughly Hawaiianized take on Dance Dance Revolution, where as a player, you must perform a hula to prompt the growth of new wildlife. And what this video doesn't show you is how much work went into capturing these steps. We had a hula dancer who came and performed hula for our game designers and 3D modelers multiple times because these steps are meaningful and sacred, and we wanted to represent and remediate them appropriately and with care. Game worlds must show more characters who are Black, Indigenous, and people of color to stay relevant, but it's also crucial that BIPOC folks are centrally involved in determining how their bodies are portrayed and played. So I'm going to turn now to another project of mine, Speculative Play, which is about exploring social and cultural questions under the guise of possible near futures, presented through playful interactions with familiar digital interfaces. One such question concerns Quebec, where I'm located. I'm in Montreal. So Quebec has a difficult relationship with religious diversity. In recent years, bills have been passed that ban women who wear niqab, which is the full face cover that some Muslim wear. So niqab wearing women are banned from working in the public sphere or benefiting from public services. So NEOQAB is a speculative play experience that presents a dystopian workaround for cultural and religious tolerance for the purpose of getting people to experientially grapple with the complexities of this debate through their own bodies. So in this speculative world, individuals are equipped with technology that empowers them, yeah, scare quotes, to deal with niqab wearing women by replacing them visually. And I made this design choice because I wanted to mirror the control Quebec has over what Muslim women wear in the public sphere. So we bring this experience to life as a two-player experience that relies on computer vision, projections, and two different apps. So one is for the player controlling the appearance of how the other person appears, and it borrows Tinder's swipe mechanism and is about making someone else wear a body, or another identity. And another, which is a twine-based fiction, prompting the other player to act out bodily gestures from a typical day. So testing to date confirms the main hypothesis underlying NEOQAB, that having direct control over the appearance of flesh and blood embodied others feels wrong. And this is a troubling experience precisely because it's about acting on real bodies. So the last project I'll share now also falls under speculative play, and it's called the Internet of Cultural Things. And it questions how the Internet of Things might be if we took people's cultural relationships with those things into account. So focusing on eating practices and tables, because we all have to eat, and using participatory design, my team and I have begun exploring cultural practices related to food and how these might be meaningfully augmented by technology. This is a computer vision data visualization of a lunch in Hawaii, where the group is 4 Indigenous Hawaiians. And from this lunch, I learned the following. If you don't try every dish, you insult the host. Sharing is extremely important. Particular foods are considered almost holy, as are the receptacles that hold them. And you absolutely do not sit on a table. So what we're doing now is making co-designed Internet of Things kits, including sensor-enhanced table tiles that we plan to use with specific communities because we want Internet of Cultural Things design ideas to come from them. So instead of big corporations predetermining our relationships to data and continuing to grow their already enormous influence on the ways in which we live, it's central that we materialize alternatives. Through realizing alternative relationships with data, where realize is meant in the French sense of the word, to make something real, we can reclaim our own narratives involving data. So thank you. That's all I'm going to present right now. And if you have questions or you want to discuss, feel very free to email me.
Thank you so much, Irila. That was excellent. So as Irila invited, please feel free to pop in your questions at the Q&A box. We won't be looking at them just yet, but we can then capture them and return to them later. So thank you, Irila. If you could turn your video off now, I'd love to introduce Tim from Grandel Games. Tim, would you like to turn your camera on? And your mic.
Hello there.
Thank you for joining us, Tim. It would be a delight to have you introduce yourself and your work. So I'll leave you to it.
Hello there. My name is Tim Lanning. I'm the co-director and creator of Grendel Games, a company that's been around for roughly 20 years. And I've got a small PowerPoint presentation that will show the basics of our company and the work that we've done in relation to what we're talking about today. Thank you. Here we go. Pardon me. George?
Hello. We can't see the presentation just yet. We can see your bio, and also if anyone would like to see Tim's link to his company is on the chat, but the screen sharing is not working just yet. You want to try again, Tim?
Can you hear me, George?
I can hear you, yes.
Yes. Seemingly, Zoom quit unexpectedly when I tried to share a full screen presentation of my PowerPoint. So if you would please give me a second.
Not a problem. That I'm sure everyone here is used to the various mishaps of Zoom and other platforms online. I'm surprised it didn't happen earlier, so I'm sure everyone will be very forgiving. Yep, just take your time, and then in the meantime, we have some links in the chat. Oh, here we go. That's great.
Okay, so like I mentioned before, thank you all for having me. My name is Tim Lanning. I'm the CEO and co-founder of the company Grendel Games. And I would like to show you some games that can change the world in respect to what we're talking about today. So who are we? We're a small company. We're only 23 people. We've been around for roughly 20 years. And basically, our company has been developing serious games for a long time. And we have a very specific vision that we designed with serious games in regard. So we believe that the power of attraction and fun of video games can be used for more than just entertainment. And we've eventually decided to focus on three spearheads. One is education, the other is healthcare, and the other is the water and energy sector, or the sustainability sector. We've designed a very specific process that helps us design games and develop games like this. We decided to collaborate with domestic and international academic knowledge partners, and we decided to focus on research and validation of effectiveness of our serious games to make sure that other people understood what the value was of our particular games. We also decided that innovation, Internet of Things, for instance, unique angles in terms of technology would help us get us to our goals. And we always emphasize a use of high entertainment and production value. So some of the products that we're well known for, and this is a product that we're extremely proud of, is this particular product. When you look at this particular joypad or controller, you might recognize the Nintendo Wii remote and the nunchuck, but here it's framed in a plastic encasing that looks not like a regular encasing. It almost looks like a gun. And if you were to come to that conclusion, you would almost be correct, were it not that it's actually a laparoscopic instrument. It's an instrument that teaches people to do laparoscopic surgery, but we've managed to create something that's incredibly inexpensive and uses entertainment value and serious games to teach people the basic skills for laparoscopy, or so-called keyhole surgery. It's an actual serious game, but it was also developed and published for the Nintendo Wii U platform, making it very commercially available. This is a screenshot of our game. It almost looks like a puzzle game where one controls two arms, one to the left and one to the right, and tries to save small robots. And as mentioned before, it almost looks like a regular platform or puzzle game, but the fact of the matter is that it's not a regular game. Here I can show you a trailer. The fact is that it's commercially available. That made it such a surprise product, because that way we managed to publish a game very inexpensively, but also managed to reach a very large target audience to train in the basic skills of laparoscopy. We've been doing similar ventures in terms of sustainability, like the water game, the water battle game. Here's an example of how the particular flow of that water battle game works, where we have schools playing a video game that's much akin to Super Mario. We have residents in a neighborhood area connected through an app where they use their water usage to control the flow of water, and also indirectly control the flow of the levels that can be played by children in that particular area to control their water usage. And we've created a sustainability program around that, where we actually had a television program, as you can see in the upper left corner, through regional television. We had several schools actually participate, and their families and their households, to diminish peak level load on the water networks. And eventually we managed to create a game that had a large number of residents reach or reduce the peak level load on water networks. And this is all to say that when we come to the point of the question, what is the role of fun within activism? And is there a vital link between play, transgressions, and the formation of new behavior habits? I can wholeheartedly tell you that fun can be intrinsically motivating, and it can help people become activists, and it can create a vital link between gameplay and new behavioral habits. So the people that actually played our video game and the families that played our video game to change their water behavior actually changed. And the people who played our video game to train and become surgeons actually changed their behavior as well.
Thank you, Tim. That was an excellent presentation. I'm really looking forward to talking further with you and the other panelists about your projects. And finally, our third speaker today is Percy Jajamaravala, Artistic Director of ZU UK. So I'll kindly ask Tim to turn your camera off and Jaji to turn the camera on, and I'll hand over to you for your introduction.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Is that okay? Can you hear me?
Yeah, all good.
All right, brilliant. Yeah, hi, I'm Jaji, and I'm Artistic Director of ZU UK, and I make playable theatrical experiences that mainly focus on mediating the space between people, whether they're players or participants or audience members. I create with a team of technologists and performance makers various experiences that can happen across different kinds of platforms, whether that's on your phone or on Zoom, but also in the street or in a gallery or in the middle of a field even. So we're very much kind of very responsive to whatever it is that the project sort of needs to be or what it wants to be. So my question was about how can gamified design and technology be used to empower individuals to make ethical lifestyle choices and raise awareness of the customer's right to know. Yeah, so, okay, that was quite a complex question, I think. But to give you like a little bit of an in, I've gone from making performances that have had at its core the idea of transformation of the self, to now working now with interactive experiences that are playful and have games inside of them. And I love games. Games transform people too, and I'm interested in that link between transformation in play and so transformation in reality. Games that try to change what people know and how people can think about things. And something that I have seen in terms of games is that people can and do transform in incredible ways. But I think what I have learned as well is that people really only change when they feel things. They don't change because you tell them to. They don't change because they ought to. They change because they feel something and they're affected. So the idea has to connect. And I think a lot of this relates to also where this kind of stuff happens. What are the spaces in which these things can happen in? And a big part of that is, how do people come across your stuff? Does it just kind of circulate around and around the same kinds of zones of exclusivity? That's the thing that bothers me a lot, and I try to ensure that that doesn't happen by something we call hacking the familiar. So past pieces that I have made always use the kind of rituals or the actions that are super familiar to people, and wouldn't alienate my neighbors, for example. So one of the pieces is called Binaural Dinner Date, and that was creating a dating agency that happens on headphones in working restaurants. You can see it there. That's because mostly everyone in the UK knows how to sit at a table. So again, it's something that's really comfortable. Let's see another one. What's that? That's this Hotel Medea. This also had a ritual which was more complex to talk about, but essentially it was about staying up all night. So this was a show that began at midnight and ended at dawn, and that was the invite. Again, nothing too alienating or scary, although it was difficult in other ways, but the invite was, hey, come and stay up all night with us and have breakfast at dawn. This is missing. We can skip this one, please. Can we go to PMU? Okay, PMU was about making all the phone boxes across the UK ring at the same time and have an interactive experience on them. Again, everyone knows how to pick up a phone. So that's the ritual that we're hacking there. And what we're creating at the moment, what I'm currently working on, is a ghost hunt for malls. And mainly, as everybody knows how to do shopping. So a lot of the fancy kind of tech first gamified experiences that are out there just, really just don't make a lot of sense to me. I think there's a degree of alienation when you see, kind of people, I don't know, a very confusing thing of people sort of prancing about with wires coming out of their brains that link to someone on the moon or whatever, these kind of very high and fancy experiences. To me, it's just a bit, so what? I don't care. I'm really interested in experiences that relate directly to something that I do every day, that people do every day, that is part of my life, so that when a person participates, they'll never be able to look at that same thing again in the same way, whether that's about listening or phones or dating or shopping. One of the things that really drives me, especially at the moment, is this idea that the world is just too big. It just feels so, like the last couple of years, the world is so big for us to get our heads around all of it. And we live in these really complex and distracting systems. And how do we know who to believe? And it's funny because we laugh at astrologers, but we take economists very, very seriously. But they do the same thing, don't they? I mean, they both create stories using largely unknowable, massive data sets. So in order to create change, I think we do need to try to, in our own ways, understand systems. And to understand systems, let's think about them as scale and speed. For example, a mouse, which is a really small system, has a heart rate of around 700 BPM, whereas a whale, which is a really, really big system, can have incredibly a BPM, a heart rate of 2 beats per minute. Which is incredible. That's very big. So imagining something so big is hard to comprehend. And the bigger the system, the slower we got to go. We're mostly unaware of how tempo and scale affect our lives. It just sort of runs along in parallel, but we don't really notice it. And so what does that have to tell us about the world that's coming? In terms of systems, then I think what I'm trying to do is always connect macro systems to microeconomics. How do those little choices that we do, things like tipping a waiter or drinking tap water and not mineral water, connect to the widest picture of labor economics or monetary policy or global market trade, that real macro picture. So my current concerns and how I want to respond to this question is because of the project that I'm focused on at the moment, which is a ghost hunt that happens in shopping malls, is why should seeing systems clearer have an effect on changing people's consumer behavior, and so we can force businesses, to respond to that drive? Because within climate change activism, things like the Paris targets and people like Mark Jacquard and Alice C. Hill and Zayuddin Sarda, they all welcome an anti-growth model of just slowing down. And so I decided to look at slowing down as an actual thing, an actual real thing that people could do and feel and experience, because there is an undoubted global threat to the world, but it's not happening at the right tempo or the right scale to activate a kind of core response from us, because we're hardwired, aren't we, to respond automatically to things like seeing a car crash or something coming at your face or a wasp or something. But when it's too slow and it's too far away, it becomes too abstract and it's more difficult to be motivated to action. I want to just finish with an anecdote that, well, it's not really an anecdote, it's a story about somebody that who was called Robert Payne, I think, who was in love with whales, the animal, not the country, although the country is very lovable. And that was back in the 70s. And the problem was that it was the 70s in some ways, and no one cared, no one knew or cared that whaling whales was putting them on the list of endangered species. And one day he was on a boat with a friend and he accidentally came across these military recordings of sounds that no one could quite explain. It turned out, of course, to be whale song. And he thought they were beautiful and threw himself into making these, the most emotionally powerful records that he could of their music. And once made, he badgered as many people as he could to listen to it, and he got singers to sing with it, and an awareness grew, and people bought the music and they were mesmerized because the sounds were relatable. And what's interesting is that only worked because of technology. That only worked because of the sort of technology that he was able to get hold of at the time, which is, recording and pressing records and getting them out there. So this music was at the right speed and the right size for human beings to connect to. It felt human. It felt like that there was something emotional in the sound, and the plight of the whales was recognized, and the Save the Whales movement was born. So this is a really inspiring story for me anyway, that in order to try to find our own version of the whale song, right, a way out of consumer trauma, and by creating a space where we can just slow down and stop and think and connect to the idea, what do we agree to when we buy something? So in the game, you have to you have to try to shop, but the mall is haunted, and the experience leads you into a ghost hunt. And this hunt is also leads you to understanding how interconnected we all are. You know, we want to use them all as this repository of thousands and thousands and thousands of products that there are there, to see this interconnectedness, you know, to literally touch the connection with people that have touched those same products when they were being made, when they were being packaged, and to connect with, you know, the boatmen of Sri Lanka and the anti-logging activists in Brazil and people who are risking their lives to educate girls in Afghanistan or Swaziland, but also that interconnectedness is that we're connected to corporations, we're connected to these ghosts that spill oil into the oceans, that release the pollutants into the air, that, you know, employ children or test on animals in cruel ways, or build these buildings that workers end up jumping off of and creating waste and plundering irreplaceable resources, etc. And so we wanted to, like, how do you know, so we wanted to kind of play and twist the idea of winning, because we are in the West, and we in the West, we're winning, aren't we? On a certain level, we're crushing it. We live like emperors. We only have to think of something that we want and someone's ringing the doorbell and delivering it to us. And whilst we're winning in that way, the planet and the global majority, of course, are losing, and they are losing hard. So what if the winning in our game was actually meant losing? You know, what if in our game you can have the knowledge, but it comes at a price? You have to give up comfort or bliss points, as they're known in the game. And so in the game itself, you can choose between knowing stuff about the products that you've touched or picked up. But if you decide to know about them, you lose your bliss points. And so the difficult choices, you know, have to be made. We're playing with these win states as reflections of real life choices, because ultimately, as Sardar says, we need to rethink the idea of growth to one of anti-growth or degrowth, because it's our obsession with growth that has caused these like devastating relationships with nature. And so, yeah, so that's really my response to the question, in terms of raising awareness about the customer's right to know.
Thank you, Jaji. That was excellent. So if you wouldn't mind turning your video off, that brings us to the end of the introductions and bang in the middle of our talk. So thank you everyone for your comments, for staying thus far, and let's hope you stay with us until the end. This is the end of the introductions, as I mentioned, where panelists were asked to address very specific questions. And for the second half, everyone was very generous to open themselves up to be a bit more vulnerable and a bit more experimental about our next step. As makers and designers of socially engaged games, games for change, I think we couldn't help but try and test the very system we are talking within, and the boundaries and the opportunities we have to engage with you, even if it's via a chat box. So this might go very well, it might fail badly. So we will embrace risk, and we'll introduce what the next stage is. And it should be quite straightforward. We are inviting you to write with us, chair and panelists, a one-line manifesto as a fill-in-the-gap game. As you can see in the chat, it has 3 blank. As someone who, blank, I believe there needs to be blank, and the way I will achieve this is by blank. And each of our panelists will guide us through how they might approach a statement like this. We've mentioned earlier the connection between the manifesto and the sort of value-based and personal connections where most of the designers contributing today see as a meaningful and almost fundamental element to the game, to the game of Games for Good. So this is how it's going to go. Each of the panelists has recorded 1 minute of themselves thinking out loud. They also have offered a song that they would normally listen to when they are thinking through these questions. So we will focus this attention that we have on each of the blanks one at a time, and each of them will be led by a panelist. So As Jaji just mentioned in the chat, you can do this on paper and then put in the chat, or you can think out loud through the chat. All participation is welcome. So I will start by sharing a 1-minute video from Pastor Jaji Maravala, who will take us through the first blank of the sentence, which is, as someone who blank. And then we'll all, including myself and the other panelists, respond to her provocation to write our own versions. Okay, hope that's clear. If not, keep asking questions and I'll keep an eye on the chat. But I'll start by sharing a video just to bring us into the thinking process that Pastor Jaji would normally go through. Here we go. Seem to have lost my, here we go. My Zoom decided to disappear exactly at that point.
Yeah, so thinking about this part of the personal manifesto that we're doing together, I thought it was really important, the idea of putting the self part, you know, at the beginning of the manifesto, this kind of anchoring and positioning that I think is important now in the world, and how I certainly experience the world as changing, just to put one's, instead of just one's point of view, you know, and one's opinion and what I think, it's more about this, like, well, what's happened to me? What's my experience? How am I embedded in this subject? And so putting the self at the beginning, as a way to be transparent as well about where we're coming from, why we think the things in the way that we do.
Okay, so I'll ask Jaji to join us now. If you could turn your video back on and guide us through your thinking about writing as someone who.
I'm in Brazil. Yeah, I'm stuck in Brazil because it's on the red list, so I can't get home. I was quite sad actually. My daughter tried to send a postcard home the other day, and we went to the post office and they wouldn't take the postcard because we didn't think that, because they're not only are they not receiving people, but they actually wouldn't take her postcard because there's no planes flying in to the UK. It really hit home at that moment, actually. So yes, all right, good. Yeah, personal manifesto, so much fun. All right, so I've only got a couple of minutes, but I've gone like very ambitious, so bear with me. Grab your pen and paper, or however you want to like throw your thoughts onto, whatever's easier. I think it's safest to say that the subject of who we are and what matters to us is a really complex one. So for now, let's just go with Hoffman's version of things and his idea that there is no one central core, you know, sense of self, but rather we live in a myriad of roles that we perform for and also like in relation to one another. They're not fixed. It's a set of masks that we have that are interchangeable and fluid and mutable. And so these roles that you perform in your everyday, as a neighbor or as something that's either been you know, really big part of your life or a small part of your life. You've either chosen them or they've already been assigned to you. For example, you might be a daughter, or you might be a cousin, or you might be a sister, or whatever. So we'll start looking at the broadest range of roles that you perform in your life. So if you wouldn't mind, for the next 10 seconds, not very long, I know, we're just going to be very light touch about this. Write down everything that comes to your mind as to the roles that you perform in your everyday life. And as you're doing that, I'll keep talking. So it could be your personal relationships. It could be, you know, in relation to the circle of people around you, your family status, elder brother, little sister, mother, godparent, etc. It could be something more about your job, your career, your position in the industry that you hold. It could be you're a boss, or you're a dog walker, or you're a nurse, soldier. It could be something more vocational, for example, that you might want to put in there, something that is more about your passion, a hobby, a vocational role, something that you've gone into through absolute love and dedication. You could be a scoutmaster, a priest, or a yogi, or someone that practices yoga or meditation, a student, whatever that role is that you also play out. And of course, it could be more political, where you're representing something or speaking for others, or you advocate for something, you're lobbying or protesting. Could also be something that's to do with something that's happened to you. So for example, you might be in recovery, might be a PTSD survivor, you might be in mourning, you might be a lottery winner. It's something that you've had experience of. So now you've had a few seconds to do that. Just in thinking about all the roles that you perform, let's consider, without thinking too long about any one specific one, how do we measure ourselves in those performances? Like, what are the metrics of success for them? So for example, you may look and see that, you know, you perform them either to the very best of your ability. Like today I'm performing the role of a speaker at a talk, and I'm trying to do that, you know, the best that I can. I'm taking that quite seriously. Or are there things in my life that I accept that I do, you know, really badly? So you could assess your performance differently at different times. For example, I'm a good daughter, but I'm a terrible waitress, or I'm a great boss, but I'm a rubbish friend, or, you know, and so these roles come and go, the priorities come and go. We change a little bit, don't we, every day? And so thinking about these metrics of success, I want to invite you now to start to consider the pressure. Like, where's the pressure points in those metrics of success for you when you're thinking about the roles you've just written down, and how you're measuring up against the expectations, and where are those expectations coming from? So you'll now be in a process where you're sifting through what's important to you. Like, for example, yeah, I might be a rubbish waitress, but I couldn't give a shit. You know, I don't care. I don't want to be the best waitress in the world. I'm doing this for now because, you know. Or you might be studying to be a doctor, but actually those aren't your desires. Those are your parents or your families or your community's expectations. So bringing this to the manifesto, let's now choose, out of everything that you've written down, maybe choose 3 that perhaps you feel are the most important, most significant ones to you right now. So they could be important to you in terms of, you know, ethics or significance in your life, or just because of how much mental space it's taking up in your life right now, how much time you're having to spend on it. It might be really different because of the pandemic. It might be something that you believe in, but you can't actually do anymore right now because of the situation that we're in. So regardless of how much time you spend on it, or how you even perform it in terms of your how well you think you perform it, just think about if it's meaningful to you, if you're a violinist, even if you're only beginning. So now you've got 3, and you're going to strike out 2 of those and go to one of those. And that one is going to be what strikes you today as an area that needs the manifesto the most. So you've got the 3 and take away 2, so you're left with 1 that you think is the most in need of a manifesto. It's in an area where it needs most change, and then you should be able to fit that into our sentence.
Fantastic. As you're doing that, we're going to start moving to the second blank. Thank you, Xiaoji. I will show you a 1-minute video from Rilla to introduce us to the next blank and same, I'll share a song suggested by Rilla and give you a couple of minutes to write that as well. So I should be able to share the video a bit easier now.
Both my work and the work of others has emphasized that if you want to maximize the learning or transformative effect of serious games, they need to mesh with your cultural beliefs and worldview. Otherwise, you can't integrate potential learnings into your life. If a play experience is too out there, you dismiss it as irrelevant. And to be clear, I'm not talking about too fictional, too fantasy, too futuristic. I'm talking about, does this integrate with my views? Could it integrate with my views? And the integration works both ways. The games should be adapted to players, but the players should also be adapted to the games. They should come with a certain mindset, a critical reflective mode that is active both during and after play. So to summarize, I believe there needs to be a commitment from designers to invite and support resonance between worldviews and serious play, and a commitment from players to embed and strengthen connections between serious play and worldviews.
Thank you, Rilla, in the video, and welcome, Rilla Live. I'll hand over to you for the next part of the instruction.
Hey, okay, so the way that I'm going to do this is going to be different from how Zhaji did it. So I'm going to get my screen share going again. Screen share, okay. So there we go. Hopefully we're all seeing that. So I want to reiterate the statement. So I came up with I believe was there needs to be a commitment from designers to invite and support resonance between worldviews and serious play, and a commitment from players to embed connections between serious play and worldviews. So I want you to take a moment to think about responses to the following questions. So one, when serious games have really worked for you, and you can broaden this out if you like, it doesn't need to be serious games, it can be gamified apps that you have on your phone, for instance, it can be Runkeeper, like why does Runkeeper work for you? So I want you to sort of bring to mind any experience that you've had like that. And then secondly, I want you to think about play experiences that have stuck with you, that have resonated with you or changed you, and have not necessarily been serious games ones. So for me, an example is a board game that I played with my husband and one of my best friends years ago in Copenhagen. It was a pretty silly board game about being a troll, and I had a lantern, and there was a sort of a prisoner's dilemma kind of mechanic dynamic where the two of them thought that I was trying to cheat them, and they ganged up on me. And I remember feeling really betrayed by both of them, by my husband, by this best friend, because they thought that I would do that to them. So this experience really sticks with me. It plays into some of the things that Zhaji talked about. There are those moments that are familiar, like they sort of bleed between a play experience and a real situation, a world situation, a relationship. Okay, so those are my examples of things that I'm thinking about. So now the next part of the prompt, I want you to think about this. So what were qualities of those experiences that might have led to this? And what are things that you want to see in these games? And unlike Zhaji, I'm going to stop talking here, and I'm going to just let you think about this and write for a moment. Okay, So, George, I hand over to you now again.
Thank you. Thank you, Rilla. That was great. If you could turn your video off again, I will now share the third and final video of Tim's contribution to help us think about the third blank in our manifesto for today. That should happen now.
My ludicrous heart tells me that people can be changed, that they can be motivated by playing games, intrinsically motivated. And my ludicrous heart is mostly right. But what I found out over the past 20 years is that people cannot only be intrinsically motivated through gameplay, they also need to be aware of the fact that this particular game or experience is out there and that it's actually helping them to change the world around them. We've been working with domain experts from all across the globe in various domains, and whether it was sustainability, healthcare, or education, the one thing that we found out was that yes, you can actually change people's behavior through games. You can make them become activists, but you also have to reach them. And the one mistake that we keep making continuously is that we do not embrace commercialism. We do not embrace communications and marketing efforts to engage a large enough crowd to actually create something that can make that change. We need momentum. And that momentum can only be found when we work together with parties that are capable of reaching the masses. Even if our games can create change, we cannot create that particular change when we don't reach a critical mass.
And on that note, I welcome back Tim. Could you turn your video on, Tim, when you can?
Yes, trying.
Great. Well, we can hear you.
You can hear me, but when I try to switch to the video mode, it says you cannot start your video because the host has stopped it.
Ah.
So I don't know what's going on there, but oh, there we go. We're starting my video. There we are.
Great.
Hello there.
So I'll hand over to you now for the final section of the manifesto.
So I think the most important thing, like I expressed in the video, is that we think about how we actually reach our target audience. We know how to engage them. We have ideas about how we do involve them. But the most important part, for my part, is how we can reach them and actually create critical mass, basically. And I think for me, so when we look at the one-line manifesto, as someone who is a critical or a serious game designer, I believe there needs to be a method that can be combined with creating serious games and the information from all the different domain experts to create a critical mass. And by this particular way, we will achieve world change, and we will achieve behavioral change in a large enough target audience to have that particular effect that we're looking for.
Thank you, Tim, and especially your provocation around embracing commercialism. I'd like to invite all the panelists back now, and as our attendees share their thoughts and their versions of their one-line manifestos, we will allow another couple of minutes for that to be happening. And in the meantime, before we take on Q&A box, thank you, events team, for reminding to add the Q&A to the questions to the Q&A box. As those are arriving, I will first start asking you, the panelists, if you have a question for each other. It could be a continuation of the manifesto, or it could be something else from the introduction, something that you're keen to know.
So Tim, I'm going to jump in. I'm really curious about this prompt from you, or this urging from you to embrace commerce and sort of commercial perspectives.
Yep.
Because I'm in academia, and there's been, I don't know, for various reasons, including things like non-disclosure agreements, it's often the case that our community doesn't work in a totally intertwined way with people in the commercial sector. So what is your advice for how we go about redefining relationships and moving beyond NDAs?
Yeah, well, that's a great question, Rilla, and I think you've hit it on the mark. So the legal perspective from that is one problem that creates hurdles for us to work together, and I think that's very sad, because there's no way that we're all going to make a little bit of money and change the world, and it's the only way that these two things are going to mesh perfectly well and get that critical mass going without us being able to look beyond the legality of this stuff, or the legal stuff, part of this stuff. So I believe that it's very important that we all connect and that we look for a way to move beyond that. I think I've got a very good example, the rehabilitation game stuff that we did for 4 or 5 years time. Were largely marred by academic institutions that were working together and were not willing to share what they were doing. So they were all doing their own separate research on their own particular individual island, and all their particular prototypes were launched in their particular spaces. And they all had the same results, which were significant for the region, but were insignificant for the world. And that's a shame. So we keep inventing the same wheel over and over, both from an academic perspective and from a game developer's perspective. And I think the one way we can move beyond that, as you questioned, is by combining facts, by combining statistics, identifying target audience, identifying how large that particular group is from a commercial perspective, and get the right parties involved to start disseminating the knowledge, the academic knowledge from one point, and the production value from the other point. And that way we also can get more engaging video games that look the part, play the part, feel the part for the target audience, but also do the part from an academic perspective. And I think that's what we need to be working towards.
Thank you. If I may, I'd like to bring a question from the Q&A box, and I would like to open to all panelists to comment. What are the opportunities and challenges of working between the worlds of art making and game design?
I can jump in there a little bit. I think certainly for me, what I've experienced, and I can only talk about my experience as you know, in terms of what I've seen and discovered and been working with and working against. I think one of the big challenges is that there is something we've got to be really careful around technology. I think that's something that's problematic in this intersection between all these disciplines is something that is about technology that really bothers me. It gets really fetishized, and I think that also induces a state of exclusivity in the work. So it's about, you know, how can I think some questions have to be reversed, don't they? I mean, the tech world is exclusive as it is, and you've got to be so careful about this thing about, you know, promoting new tech as some sort of value in itself, because you know, like right now we're seeing like how India is targeting climate activists, for example, using, you know, sexy new technology. So it's really important to sort of separate out. And the commercial in the commercial world of game design and art, I think is also a dangerously exclusive, because they rely on networks that are exclusive, and these zones are normally accessed from by people from advantaged socioeconomic groups, I think. And so this kind of this sense that I have that inequality is a backdrop for commercial these commercial frameworks of art and game making and, you know, performance, and where these things meet, that scales right across the social, the cultural, the aspirations. And I think that our industry really suffers for it. You know, it suffers without that diversity of thought. And yeah, because it's serving weirdos, you know, this acronym, which I really like at the moment, which is Western educated, industrial, rich, and from democratic societies, which we mostly all are in this group. We've got to remember that we as weirdos are a minority group, not the global majority. And so always considering that aspect of, like, you know, when art and game making meet, is like, who's it for? Who's the work for? Who's it really going to benefit? Is it just self-serve? Like, what is its contribution to the world? And in some ways, Serious Games is answering that, isn't it? But the reason why that acronym came up is because they saw that 96% of psychological and behavioral studies are conducted on weirdos. But then the research is presented as universal. You know, it's like, what? No, wait, back up. So I think those are the moments that we've really got to think about, who then are, it's not universal, it's not generalized to all human beings across the planet. That's absolutely not true. There's a systemic bias into who we think of as users and players and audience members. And we need to remember that when we do things like playtesting and stuff, because it's otherwise it just becomes like a really useful pretense.
Jaji, I just want to jump in actually and give a specific example which makes your point about like weird test subjects, it makes it for me even more troubling. And this is the fact that a lot of psychology studies are conducted in universities where students have courses for credit, where all they have to do to get the credits for that course is go and participate in like 30 studies that semester. So that means that these theories of psychology about cognitive psychology, social psychology are being modeled on students who can afford to be at those universities. So when I found that out, it was really quite sort of world altering for me. It made me actually sort of question a lot of the psych theory that's been developed over the last 50 years. So yeah, certainly that's something I'm very, very aware of, particularly for gamification, because if you start delving into the gamification literature, there's a pretty tight coupling between theories of gamification and theories of social and cognitive psychology. So yeah, I'm always sort of a little bit skeptical when I see something that it's justified by, you know, basis in psychology research. But I just want to sort of pull back to the question that you started answering. So what are some of the challenges? I can't remember the precise phrasing. George, can you remind us?
Sure. What are opportunities and challenges of working between the worlds of art making and game design?
So one of the challenges for sure is the amount of funding that's available. That is a massive, massive challenge that I see in people around me every day. So I live in a very gamey city. I live in Montreal. That we have a lot of big game studios, AAA large game studios located here, the most famous being Ubisoft. And then at the same time, there's this really interesting dynamic where a lot of people get into games, not because they want to work in those large studios, but because they're like, oh, I want to I want to be a game designer and make my own unique IP, but they also want to get jobs. So they end up working at those big companies. And then in these game cities, what happens is a lot of people who've been working in that industry at some point realize that, okay, I'm not going to be able to make my unique IP working at this big studio because the projects they tend to take on are large, multi-year, risk averse. So that for that reason, there's a lot of the time you'll see studios releasing games and then sequels, sort of more of the same. But okay, a lot of people who've worked at these studios then often end up leaving and starting their own indie companies. But gosh, finding funds, like when you are a startup indie community, Tim's going to know much more about this, but this can be very difficult. This can be very difficult indeed. So really it is a struggle. And what we do see, what I've seen with those studios is often they have to balance doing, making games that they really want to make and games that they know that they can get funded perhaps through collaborating in research projects. So that's one mode that I've seen companies have managed to stay afloat. On another tack, I would say a challenge is that from my perspective as an academic, a scholar, we're still finding our feet in terms of working out how to write about game design in an academically rigorous way. And game studies and games research is incredibly interdisciplinary, which means that there are lots of us with many different beliefs about the right way to do research and what constitutes rigorous research. So we're still trying to work out, well, how do you what makes for academically grounded sort of artistic games research? So from my community, that's a challenge for sure.
So I wanted to take this opportunity to invite final remarks from all our speakers. And considering we have such a wide audience with us today, perhaps the point of that is being echoed by, I guess, every speaker in a different way has been about the access, either access to a privileged and quite exclusive field, access to technology, access to networks, but also the area of just starting out. If you want to genuinely dedicate work to collaborate, you could dedicate work to collaborate and find funds to start out. Is there any final provocation that you want to leave us with as we close this talk? And perhaps one more comment is, if as a result of us attempting this joint exercise of writing the manifesto, whether there's anything else that you want to mention before we close. Maybe I'll go first then.
Sorry, yes, please do, Jose. I think I had
That's fine. Were you trying to speak, Shaji, with a muted mic?
No, sorry, I just didn't realize. Were you talking to
Yes,
us?
sorry. I'll repeat.
I'm so sorry.
I was just asking you you three for final comments as we close the talk, either from the manifesto perspective or the other discussion around access to funds and privilege and so on.
Shaji, have some final comments, please. Otherwise, I'll just be yammering away.
No, I don't have final comments because I got caught. I was really interested in what's happening in the chat about the ball and the body. And I was like, I have something to say about that. So I'm mixed mediaing right now by bringing in my final comment to be with what's happening in the chat, which is like discussions around catching a ball. To finally end on the body is so important, it's so vital, as something that I think is really interesting. This question of like that universality is something that could be found in physical expression, and and how complex that can be. And yet I kind of agree with Tim that the body does know. And so when a ball is thrown at it, the body will go to catch it. And I think that's the thing that I really, that's the pitch that I want to go in at when I'm creating work with people.
As we're running out of time, I will take this moment to do three things. One is to thank you very much for coming, and for all people who put the time aside to come here and to write and contribute in the chat and join our experiment with us. I would also like to say thank you to everyone who organized and about to call Ghislaine back to wrap up and invite you for the final talk of the series, and make one invitation, which is if you'd like to join the playtest, we have a link in the chat now for June playtests for DATUM Audio app, which is the app that Jaji mentioned, very much in progress. But if you'd like to sign up, we'd be more than happy to invite you. So thank you everyone for coming. Thank you to the speakers. Thank you, Ghislaine. I'll hand over to you now.
Well, thank you to all of you. That was very wonderful and very interesting. Some fascinating stuff I'm still thinking through from each of you. Thank you. So, and we'll add into all our thinking on this project for sure, as these webinars are, in terms of knowledge exchange amongst the partners, as well as into this wider audience that we're reaching out to today. So yes, and thank you, George, for the great sharing. And thank you to everyone who's attended and the add-ins to the chat box. So as we mentioned at the beginning, this is a recording that will go up onto the University of Greenwich Research Space YouTube site in a week or so's time. And linked to that, we will be putting up the document which will be made from the chat box here, so that you can watch it alongside the recording and get the whole of this special session. And that will be alongside the previous two webinars that have happened and the last one which is coming up. So I think we'll have the YouTube will go up in the box for you. If not, we'll find a way to put that up, the YouTube link. And the next webinar that's going to be happening is looking at sustainable and ethical use of body data in immersive environments. And that's on June the 9th, in about three weeks' time, at the same time as this event in BST, British Summertime, at 6:30. And you can sign up for that webinar on the Eventbrite link in the chat box right now. So do join us for that, because that actually is kind of a concluding webinar to this chat series. It links quite strongly into what Jaji was just saying about the body first, because that's my prerogative too, definitely. So I'm with her on that. And we're looking at VR, XR, we have metaverses, blockchain, we're looking at data mutualization options, we're looking at unions, lots of different experts coming into there. And actually, again, not looking for solutions, looking at what we've got to look at next, how we research further onwards, what answers we can't find yet, but what are the possible options coming up, as there's a lot happening out there at the moment. NFTs, blockchain, there's a lot of change, and we need to look at all these. So do join us for that, sign up there. And I just want to say thank you very much, George, for great sharing. Thank you to Rila Khaled, Tim Lanning, and Persis Jaje Marvella. Thank you for all coming in from your different time zones today, because you are all over the world. I believe Rila's in Montreal, Tim's in the Netherlands, and Jaje and George in Brazil, and we're all sitting here in London at the with a slightly sunny evening, probably not as nice and warm as you two are, but. And thanks also very much to the University of Greenwich for hosting these webinars and for supporting them through the Innovate UK Fund that we're all part of. Particularly, I'd like to thank the events team alongside George for supporting this webinar, Fakar Raza, Karen Ward, Jaylan Akbas, who's actually working from the team from the Greenwich University Partnership with the Law Department, Bree Pal, who's working with Body Data Space into the DATUM webinars, and Susanna Lowell, who's been doing this amazing tweeting on #NudgePush21. And please do follow that through. Have a look at the tweets afterwards. There's some great ones there. And do retweet for us so that we get this knowledge going further and the exchange going onwards. So thank you to everybody. And we'll say good night now and let you all go to different bedtimes today. So yeah, bye.